Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Teens No Cap. I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I'm a licensed mental health counselor specializing in the treatment of high-risk teens, and you are listening to Teens No Cap, which is all about teens in treatment, parenting teens, and how to work with teens in a clinical sense. So if you are a parent who's actively parenting a teen, or you are a clinician that's working with teenagers, I'd love to have you as part of my groups. Please find me on Facebook under Teens Uncharted. I host 2 different groups on Facebook to really provide support and community for those of you who are navigating through this new phase of development, because teens are not like any other group of people. I have spent the last couple podcasts talking about some different things, and it's been a bit since I've done a kind of Reddit thread response. And so I figured I could take some time today and go through some fun questions on Reddit and really just give some insights into my thoughts as a teen therapist. So without further ado, we are going to jump in. So this first one, is actually really interesting, and I love some of the responses with this, but I'll read it. So this user posted a few weeks ago about their 14-year-old son who was making a poster for homework when really it was actually to ask out a girl. They let it go, wanted him to have some privacy, but then it sounds like he started lying more. So teen asked if they could take him to a local area for a hangout with a friend, a buddy, a boy, and they were like, sure, no problem. So come to find out that he actually wasn't with a buddy, he was with a girl. And the parents addressed it in a really beautiful way. And so I want to just put this out there. I don't know if this is direct quotes, but I really appreciate this. So they basically said, hey, we know you weren't meeting with your friend at this space. We know it was a girl. Now, I want to pause because I think that is so lovely, right? We should not be asking teenagers questions we already have the answer to, right? The conversation we want to set up is not a conversation of whether or not the information is valid, right? Which is why you say, why did you do this? Or where were you? Or, any of those questions. We really want to just make a statement of we know that this information was wrong, which is what they did. Beautiful setup, because that sets you up for a more in-depth conversation about what's actually happening. And it's not so much a fact-finding or fact-checking situation, which we don't want to get into. If we know the information, we should tell them that. So we know it was a girl, and that's completely fine, but you can't lie to us about who you're going to be with or where you're going to be, right? We want you to have privacy, but we also need to trust you. So you can tell us something is private, and we'll respect that, but you have to be truthful so we can trust you, right? So the cool part about this is that they didn't respond with grounding. They didn't respond with consequences. They didn't respond with shame and guilt and grief and frustration, right? They named what was happening, right? You can't lie to us about this. We want you to be able to have privacy. And they gave an expectation of what they want going forward. You need to be truthful with us so that we can trust you when you're out doing these things. They also gave the message that they support their son in continuing growth and development, continuing the trajectory of wanting to spend more time with girls or people he's interested in, and having that be something that was really kind of a lovely setup instead of being like, you're too young and you shouldn't do this and whatever, right? What I always say about teenagers is that if they're curious about something and they're investigating it, they're A, old enough to talk about it, and B, likely going to be doing it anyway, unless you are willing to have that conversation with them and just put it out there about, we know that this is a step that you are going to be taking. We want to support you, but we need you to be honest with us. So I love this so much. I thought this thread was really lovely. And I also have to say that a lot of the people that commented totally warmed my heart, because their responses were less about what actually happened and more about whether or not the poster worked to ask this person to a dance. And apparently it did. So very happy ending with this. I loved it so much. And I love how people were just so supportive, and the parents did a really great job at framing that, not as a way to shame their child or their teenager, but as a way to help support that growing development and being like, hey, we're open to this, we want to support you, and giving them literally the tools to navigate that next step. So sometimes when I'm working with teens and I'm working with families, there's a lot of frustration, and parents get really frustrated when, a teenager is doing something. But again, if they're doing it, they're already in it. They've already started it. They've already explored it. They're already curious. It's maybe not about shutting it down, but it's more about understanding what that's like for them and what they're really into and what they like, how they see that as part of their life. So, and every teen has to grow up. We all have to start somewhere. They had a really wonderful conversation with their teen about that situation. So let's get to the next one. This is a really good one. I have thoughts on this. All right. This says, need help with teen parenting. My son is dating the wrong kind of girl. My incredibly bright 15-year-old ADHD son is dating a 14-year-old girl who uses substances, vapes, takes prescription antipsychotics, antidepressants, and has been hospitalized for suicidal tendencies. She's covered with self-inflicted scars. She keeps him up all night because she has what she calls insomnia. She misses a lot of school, spends time at friends' houses, and now he's been falling asleep in class and losing focus on academics. The girl's parent offered him weed the first and only time he visited their home. So here's the really interesting part about this is that we, whether we are teenagers or adults, are always going to go through situations where we're going to explore something and be curious about it, and it may not be the best fit for us, and that's okay, right? When you have a situation like this where your child, your teen is dating someone and you're like, I don't know if they're the right fit, right? Unfortunately, with teenagers, it's actually not up to you to decide who they get to date and how they get to date people, right? The more important conversation is to really help them understand attachment, why they're into this person, what they like that they do, what does this person bring to their life, what is the primary focus of said relationship, what are they getting out of it, right? We want to focus so heavily on the processing part and really understanding the how, when, why, where of this decision, that we're really helping them understand how they're thinking about it, how they're feeling about it, and what would it mean if this relationship were to go forward, and what would it mean if it were to end? I'm sure that as adults, we can look back and we can say that there were times that we were like really struggling with different things, and it would suck to have everybody like abandon you during those times. But I do think it's not a matter of telling them who they can date and how they can date, but it is a matter of really understanding the hows, whys behind that. So for instance, for this kid in particular, I would really be curious like what he's noticing in terms of the impact of this relationship is having on his academics, on his sports, on his life. Is there something about this person that really makes him feel alive, that really makes him feel engaged, right? What is the connection all about? Could it be about sex and drugs and whatever? Sure. Could it also be about this person like lives chaotically and doesn't have any boundaries, and is your person, your teen, trying to understand what that life is like, right? So when you have a teen, they're going to grow up, they're going to become 30 and 25 and whatever. You can't sit there and tell them what relationship they can be in and what they can't. It's not your say. But if we're talking scaffolding, we are really digging into understanding, why they're making the choices they're making and how they're understanding those impacts on their life, other people's lives, etc. So that's really where I'd want to go. I do think parents fall into the trap of trying to put the demand down or the control down to be like, you're not going to date this person and you need to break up. But what that really does is it forces secrecy. It forces a wedge between the two of you, because you're essentially like forcing collaboration instead of asking them to like really sit with you and understand the impact of that relationship. So, and I love this because the very first comment, which is perfect, this person is saying, I wish my parents talked about boundaries with this, which is really what I'm talking about. Because if you don't have boundaries and you don't understand how those things impact you, and you don't have things that like are very set in stone for how you take care of yourself, or things you engage in or things you don't, it's going to be a lot easier for him to slip into some of those patterns. So talking about boundaries is something that you don't have to wait until your kid is in a relationship. You should be talking about those 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, before they even thought about being in a relationship, right? Like, we want to really hit home the understanding that boundaries are things that we hold ourselves accountable for, and they're things that we choose out of respect, things that we choose out of, self-preservation, any of those pieces. And so the next comment, these people are great. Do not restrict his access to her. Don't make it about her at all. which is really great. I think that when you have a kid who's dating someone who you worry about pulling your kid down or like not being a good influence, you really have to kind of keep them focused on the expectations in the home because you can't really limit access. And if you do, it's probably going to blow up in your face if I'm going to be fair. So what we're talking about is if this kid is dating someone and you're just like, oh, it's not a good fit, this person is like a bad influence, you want to re-identify the boundaries and expectations you have of that person in your home. So for instance, if your son is doing this, you're talking about how like you have to have your room clean, you have to have your grades up, you have to have a minimum of B, you can't have any missing homework assignments, you have these like 3 chores a day, right? You really want to respond to situations like this with structure and routine, and reminding them of the expectations and the boundaries that you keep in your home. And that could also be no substances in the home, right? Like you can set that standard for yourself and for your home and for your like, your family. But I think a lot of parents will say, I see this person as a negative influence, or you're not going to do that anymore. But that is really not the type of relationship you want to have with your teenager, and it's not actually helping them learn and understand the skills to be able to replicate that decision making going forward. Which is when we talk about scaffolding, we're really talking about hammering that in so that they can replicate that thought and that like pattern in the future when they're working through a relationship in college where someone is not like a good fit for them. So that's part of why just saying you can't see them is not actually helping. It's an immediate problem solving thing, right? Because in your mind, you're just like, oh, you just can't see them anymore. But it's not actually helping them develop the tools and the skills to understand why you're saying that or what might be the negative impact or whatever. They're in a love bubble, right? We have to learn about the scaffolding. We have to teach them the structure for that, to teach them boundaries and expectations, and to hold them accountable for the things that they need to do in the home. Now, that doesn't mean that if you find this out and you're like, oh, they're not a good influence, that all of a sudden you're like, making this kid's life impossible, right? Because that's the other direction we don't want to go in. If you respond with expectations that are so far out of like what the typical expectation is, they're going to understand that as, oh, you're trying to keep me away from her, and they're going to push harder. So when you're talking about this, you really want to set on the things that are already in place. You want to set on the blocks, the foundation that you've already put in place in the home, and you want to reiterate what is important. Then you want to make sure you are a reliable resource when things come up in a relationship, that you can talk to them about it and that they can bring it to you, and that you're going to allow them to make a decision that feels good, that feels safe for them, that allows them to like really have the autonomy in that. All of us were teenagers at one point, and no one wants their parent like meddling in their life, especially their love life. Okay, I like this one. Honest question. Who here enjoys being a parent of teenagers? The post goes on to say, I'd say that 70 to 80% of the time, I don't like being a parent to teenagers. It doesn't help that I just got custody of them from their mom about 3 years ago, but they're both improving, but both still extremely difficult. On the flip side, all the difficulties make the other 20 to 30% maybe that much better. For what it's worth, I hate that I feel this way. I missed so much of their lives before, and I really want to enjoy these few years that I have left with them. I just really miss the older single digits and maybe tween years. Ages 5 to 10 were such good fun times. Granted, I didn't have custody, so it changed things a bit, but they were so much more fun and adventurous, and now it's just computers and phones for the most part. They were into far more back then, using their imagination, playing outdoors, enjoying being active, and I don't know that would change much, custody or not. So I bring this one up because I think that when we're talking about the parenting journey, there are a lot of struggles at every different age range that you have. And I do think that sometimes parents are more suited to parent younger children. They're more suited to parent infants. They're more suited to parent whatever. We have the strengths in different areas. And I think that it's okay to be able to acknowledge that and to maybe know that you enjoyed a phase of life more than a certain one that you're enjoying now. But every phase of life comes with pros and cons. Every phase of life comes with different struggles, different things that you're going to be up against, especially when you're parenting. So I'm not shaming this person at all. I think that it's like a super honest, it's a genuine question. Parenting teenagers is really hard because you're parenting someone who has, for the most part, a fully functioning, developed brain, and at the same time has a lot of their own autonomy and independence. And so it's not about control or command or compliance, but what it is about is collaboration and joining with them where they're at rather than having them meet you where you're at. And I actually love the comments on this too. And this is exactly what I would recommend for this, because I do think that there can be so much joy in parenting teenagers if you know kind of how to access that and what that is. But we don't talk a lot about how to parent teenagers. We don't talk a lot about how to kind of develop that relationship as they go. And all of the stuff that people talk about is a lot of parenting birth to 5, right? Like there's so many birth to 5 situations that are happening, and people talk about that all the time. There's so much support. There's less support in terms of how to parent a teen and what to do to prep for that age range and that developmental cycle. So this person said, and I love this for them, I love parenting my teen more than any other stage, but I had to join him and not the other way around. So she goes on to explain, he joined mountain biking, so I bought a mountain bike. He likes weird ass TV shows, so I learned fun facts about them and made snacks. I have had to work at not being clingy, and once I got that under control, he chooses to spend time with me. He just turned 18, and I wish more than anything I could do the 15 to 18 time frame again, because watching him grow and become smart and independent has become the greatest joy of my life. That is so beautiful. And when we're talking about parenting teenagers, that is really part of the core of it, is being able to join them where they're at, right? I talk a lot in my private practice when I'm talking with parents and doing consultation calls. I really try to identify how much stress and pressure teens are under these days, right? And this is a generation of teens who are raised on phones, raised on tablets, raised on internet, raised on, computer-based academic work, right? They were raised on standardized testing. They had very limited time outside. Activities weren't the same. When I think about teens nowadays, there's so much pressure on them, and it's pressure from adults. And so when I structure my private practice, and if you're a clinician working with teens, this is something to think about. I didn't want a teenager to have to choose between therapy and activities. I didn't want them to have to choose between all of these other pieces that are so functional for their life and so good for them, just to adhere or to comply with treatment or other things. And so I make my schedule very flexible because I want teens to be able to do the things that they feel passionate about, to have that well-rounded life. That is a specific aspect of me joining them where they're at and not asking them to join me where I'm at because it's more convenient for me. I think when you're able to do that, it becomes a lot easier, and they're seeing your investment, your openness, your desire to bond with them, which I think can really communicate safety in a lot of ways for teens who may not actually tell you that verbally, but they'll show you that by spending more time with you and hanging out with you. Okay. I think this is the last one I'll do today. This one is really interesting, and it's actually something I work with a lot. So I will read this to you. This person writes, I'm looking for resources to support latency-age youth and their families who have ADHD and take things from family members, such as money from a parent's wallet. Definitely related to impulsivity, but they're not doing it in school or anywhere else, and they know that it's wrong. So I want to back up for a second, because when we're talking about diagnosis in the DSM, right? Oftentimes, we are looking at areas of functioning in a variety of settings. So we're looking at their symptomology and their presentation at home. We're looking at that at school. We're looking at that with friends. We're looking at that at work or in other areas they might have access to. And we're looking at that in a broad sense, right? And so one thing that I think we have gotten away from is that understanding of it being a broad situation. So if something is happening in 2 or more areas of life, that is something that is definitely impacting them. We can see it, we can name it. We can also identify that they may have less control or less skills in terms of whatever that behavior is. But if something is happening and it's in a very specific situation, right, like only at home, and we are trying to then essentially like blame it potentially on ADHD or neurodivergency, it brings up a few red flags for me. And one of those is because I feel like we talk a lot about how, ADHD can be really out of control and it can be really chaotic, it can be a lot. And there's also a lot of ways that we can organize and align ourselves, even if you do have an ADHD brain, to successfully complete tasks. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but there are skills that we can work on with that, right? But in this situation, if we're literally blaming stealing, right, which is a behavior, on ADHD, which is something that at that age especially they may not feel like they have control over, we're basically like disempowering them and showing them that like it doesn't matter what you do, right? Like it's not going to work. And we're taking away some of the control and the empowerment that they might have if we talked about it in a different way. So for this situation, they're talking about how the stealing is actually only happening in one environment. And because it's happening in one environment, there's a few things that come up for me in terms of, let's say, like clinical presentation, right? With this, I would be wondering what the benefit is of that behavior in that environment. I would look at it in terms of the dynamic. I would look at it in terms of the response patterns. I would look at it in terms of attachment regulation, who are welcoming in, whatever. And I've actually, on a little bit of a tangent, had talked about this with several different people throughout the last week, where when we look at a situation, we are identifying positives and negatives from our own perspective rather than looking at it from their perspective. For instance, we can look at the baseline behavior and say, well, stealing is wrong, stealing is bad, stealing is going to get you in trouble. But if a client is doing that and they're getting feedback, input, connection from that behavior, and their goal was connection, feedback, input, with that behavior anyway, they've actually reached their goal, right? Even though they did it in a way that like we might identify as like bad or negative, they still met their goal. So for them, that would be a positive behavior, okay? So the fact that this is only happening in one specific situation at home leads me to believe that it is an attachment-based potentially situation, or it's some sort of burnout when they get home and they just can't control it and etc. But I do think we talk a lot about the negative side of coping skills, the negative side of self-harm, the negative side of whatever, but we have to also consider the possibility that those things could actually be positive for that client. And we have to flip the script and talk about that, as well as talking about like what are the negative outcomes and what are they seeing. But oftentimes we don't replicate behavior unless it does something for us or if it gets us what we need. And the fact that this behavior is being replicated and is being done specifically at home, even with a non-shaming response, even with whatever, it really leads me to believe that there is some benefit, there is some function of that behavior that is feeling very positive, or it's getting them what they need, or etc. And the person in the post actually said that the money gets lost and it's like found in the dryer. So it's not even spent. So it's not even about like, I get this thing. It's like literally just the action of taking. So I would really want to like understand that. But I think at the end of the day, tying stealing in just with ADHD and not considering the other lenses or the other components that might actually like impact that or play into it is kind of like not looking at it with a full lens. So I work a lot with this behavior, and I think that like stealing, particularly from family, can actually mean a lot of different things. And if you don't have training on that, I would definitely look into it because it's an interesting presentation and behavior that you can actually draw a lot of good questions from if you know how to do it. And of course, if you're working with someone, a teenager or a tween or a younger human that's like going through that behavior, we want to make sure that we're not shaming them. We want to make sure that we're not like waving our finger. We want to make sure that they understand that we are there to partner with them and understanding that behavior and what it is for them, and that we're not necessarily tied to the outcome, but we're tied to the journey. And that we want to support them in understanding that better so that they can make whatever choice they feel like they want to make. And that could be as far as impacting relationships with family. That could be, like trouble down the road, right? Like there's so many questions with that. It's a very rich content. And I hope that if you have someone who is stealing, or if you have someone that you've worked with as kind of managing that behavior, then you can have a really awesome conversation about it now that we've chatted a little bit about it. But this has been a lot of fun. I will wrap up with that for today. I think there's 3 really good scenarios talking about different situations, talking a lot about different parenting pieces. If you're still listening, would love to have any feedback, questions, comments. What would you do if your kid was stealing, if your teen was stealing? Let me know your thoughts on this episode below. I am always looking for guests on the show. If you are someone who works with teens, or if you want to talk about your own teen journey and what that was like for you, I would love to have you on. I very much believe that reflection is a really great resource that we don't use as often as we should. And so if you're someone who is an adult now that had experience as a teenager that you think other people could learn from and grow from, I'd love to have you on. Please fill out the form below. But if you are a parent who's listening, please feel free to find me on Facebook and join my free Parenting of High-Risk Teens Facebook group. If you are a clinician who works with teens and you want to know more, please join me at the Therapists Who Work with Teens Facebook group. I would love to have you. But I'll let you go. Happy weekend. Until next time.